One morning, Takashi's mother called out, warning that she'd leave without him if he didn't hurry. Before heading downstairs, Takashi paused for a moment, looking at his comrades and the Medal of Honor they had earned together. His mother smiled and told them to enjoy school after being away for so long. Then they left the house. But getting back to this peaceful life hadn't been easy. 3 years earlier, the world had fallen into chaos. An alien invasion erupted across the globe, turning everyday life into a living nightmare. Cities collapsed. Countless soldiers died. Humanity fought desperately just to survive. And at the center of that war was Takashi. After years of non-stop battles, he accomplished what nobody thought possible. He destroyed every last alien. Now, standing at the end of it all, he let out a quiet breath. After everything that happened, today was officially his retirement day. 3 years had passed since he was drafted into the military, the same year he entered middle school. Looking back, the time had flown by. He wasn't overwhelmed with emotion, but there was still a strange feeling in his chest as he watched soldiers celebrating the war's end. Then someone called out to him. It was Natalie. She asked what he planned to do next. Takashi said he was finally returning to his hometown. Then he asked about her plans. Natalie's expression softened. Her hometown had been completely destroyed. She had nowhere left to return to. Takashi immediately sensed where this conversation was heading. Sure enough, Natalie casually suggested that he take her back to Japan so they could live together. She claimed she wanted to stay with a strong man like him. Takashi instantly rejected the compliment, insisting that Natalie was stronger than he was. But deep down, he already knew he couldn't say no. After all, Natalie had saved his life more times than he could count. The moment he agreed, Natalie lit up with excitement. Takashi quickly reminded her that living expenses would be split equally. Natalie happily agreed without hesitation. With that settled, Takashi looked forward to finally seeing his parents again. Assuming they didn't think he was dead. While Takashi packed his belongings, Natalie suddenly asked if he had submitted a retirement request. Confused, he asked what she meant. Natalie explained that it was basically a resignation letter. If he disappeared without one, everyone would probably start searching for him. The thought immediately made Takashi nervous. She had a point. It would be a disaster if the military thought he had gone missing. So he agreed to submit one before leaving. Natalie cheered excitedly. First, they needed paper. The two headed to a stationery store, but the moment they arrived, they were stunned. Everything was absurdly expensive. Natalie searched for something cute, while Takashi stared at a price tag in disbelief. A single sheet of stationery cost $300. $300. Natalie casually explained that prices had skyrocketed since the war began. Takashi couldn't believe it. Even for a battlefield economy, this was ridiculous. At that point, he suggested using cheap origami paper instead. Just as they were searching for cheap paper, a woman suddenly called out to Takashi. She asked if he was Vice Corporal Shibasaki. Takashi turned in confusion. The woman immediately stood at attention and gave a sharp salute. She introduced herself as Daisy Reeves, a former member of the Joint Special Command's 3rd Land Assault Unit. Takashi vaguely remembered her. She had only been assigned about 6 months earlier. The moment Daisy realized he recognized her, she became visibly nervous. Then Takashi casually mentioned that Natalie's unit had always been a complete mess. Still, Daisy had helped them more than once. Before the conversation could continue, Natalie wrapped herself around Takashi's arm and warned him not to use the distraction to ignore her. She even threatened to kiss him. Meanwhile, Daisy remained perfectly serious. She politely asked if she could have just 2 minutes of Takashi's time. 2 minutes? Before he could react, Daisy suddenly bowed her head and shouted her thanks. The sudden outburst completely caught Takashi off guard. Then Daisy revealed why. Before joining the military, she had worked at an orphanage in a neighboring country. At the time, mandatory conscription forced nearly everyone into the war effort. Even then, Daisy spent her days caring for children and dreaming about a peaceful future. As she spoke, her voice began to tremble. Takashi noticed people gathering behind her. The atmosphere was changing fast. He repeatedly asked her to raise her head, but Daisy kept talking. Soon, tears started streaming down her face. She remembered playing with those children, listening to their dreams, watching them grow. And now, they no longer had to go to war. She would never have to receive reports saying they had died on the battlefield. By this point, Daisy was openly crying. Again and again, she thanked Takashi for ending the war. The entire store had started watching, and Takashi had absolutely no idea how to handle it. Embarrassed, he awkwardly insisted that it was fine. Then he quietly turned away. The longer they stayed, the more uncomfortable it became. So he told Natalie they should head home. But before leaving, Takashi called back to Daisy one last time. He simply told her to be happy. Then he quickly escaped, getting thanked that sincerely felt strangely uncomfortable. Praise was something he had never learned how to deal with. And as he walked away, old memories resurfaced. Back during the war, one soldier had warned him to leave as soon as his role was finished. Another had gone even further, calling him a monster, saying he wasn't human anymore. The words still lingered. Wanting to avoid any more awkward encounters, Takashi headed straight home to finish his retirement request. A short while later, Natalie suddenly rushed over. Excitedly, she showed him the letter paper she had found. Takashi was stunned. It was surprisingly cute. Natalie explained that Daisy had given it to them as a gift. Originally, Daisy had planned to use it for letters to the children back home. But now she wanted Takashi and Natalie to have it instead. She had even wished for their happiness. Natalie immediately latched onto that idea. She happily declared that they should be happy together. Takashi simply nodded while staring at the paper. Then Natalie made an observation. For someone who had served in their unit, Daisy wasn't cynical at all. She was honest. Straightforward. Maybe the war had ended before it had the chance to break her. Takashi thought that was probably true. Not long after, he finally completed his retirement request and headed to headquarters. Confidently, he handed the letter to the Director General. The director looked at it, then looked at him, then back at the letter. Finally, she gave her answer. Rejected. Takashi nearly exploded. What do you mean rejected? The Director General calmly explained that the strange voice he had just used was so disgusting that it counted as sexual harassment and deserved a court-martial. Takashi immediately protested. He was still a sensitive teenager. The director stared at him, then asked what sensitive was even supposed to mean. If Takashi considered himself sensitive, then everyone else in the world would have to be ultra-sensitive. As she muttered, idiot, under her breath, Takashi realized this conversation was already going completely off the rails. Takashi quietly muttered an insult under his breath. None of it mattered. He was still going back to Japan. As far as he was concerned, the retirement process had already begun. Natalie happily agreed. From now on, they would be living together. But the moment those words left their mouths, the Director General froze. Then she suddenly burst into tears. Both Takashi and Natalie immediately felt uneasy. The Director General pointed directly at Takashi and began shouting. Why was he suddenly talking about retirement? Had he considered her feelings at all? The war had only just ended. Everyone was drowning in work. Couldn't he help out a little longer? Then she dropped another bombshell. Apparently, Takashi still hadn't signed his non-disclosure agreement. Takashi blinked. A non-disclosure agreement? The Director General explained that it was a contract preventing soldiers from revealing anything they had seen or heard during the war. Honestly, she understood why. The war had forced everyone to do things they'd rather forget. There were countless secrets that could never be made public. But while soldiers simply returned home, she was the one getting chewed out by military leadership. Every day, the higher-ups demanded answers. What happens if classified information leaks? Who's taking responsibility? After listening to the entire rant, Takashi gave a simple response. He felt bad for her. But what did any of that have to do with his retirement? He was willing to complete whatever paperwork was necessary. Besides, despite his military title, he was still just a 16-year-old kid. What authority or responsibility could he possibly have? The Director General stared at him in disbelief. Then she asked why he looked so unconcerned. Didn't he feel sorry for her? Takashi immediately pointed out that he had literally just said he did. Then he asked a question she clearly didn't want to hear. Wasn't this the Director General's responsibility in the first place? The room exploded. The Director General instantly lost her temper. If Takashi wanted to be mean about it, then his retirement was rejected. Then she made an even more ridiculous declaration. From now on, Takashi would serve as her exclusive partner, which meant retirement was absolutely forbidden. Takashi nearly jumped out of his chair. What was that even supposed to mean? He demanded that she stop making things up. But the Director General had already entered full emotional breakdown mode. Why should she willingly let her best soldier leave? For the sake of her own mental health, Takashi needed to stay right where he was. She even grabbed onto him and promised to shower him with affection if he stayed. Takashi rejected the offer instantly. If she wanted excellence, she should recruit Natalie instead. Then he quickly turned toward Natalie for support. Big mistake. Natalie immediately wrapped herself around him. She declared that she and Takashi belonged together in both body and soul. There was no chance they would ever be separated. Then she looked at the Director General and mercilessly told her to rot alone. The Director General's face twitched. Now completely frustrated, she declared that neither of them were allowed to retire. Even if she had to abuse every ounce of authority she possessed, she would keep them both there. Natalie couldn't help teasing her. Watching the Director General tear up only made her laugh harder. At that point, Takashi finally stepped in. He understood how the Director General felt. But Natalie really needed to stop provoking her. Unfortunately, it was already too late. The Director General continued sobbing uncontrollably. Realizing the situation had become completely hopeless, Takashi made a decision. He grabbed Natalie and shouted for them to go home. Before this disaster somehow got even worse. Back at their quarters, Takashi packed his belongings while grumbling to himself. There was no way he was satisfied with becoming a reserve soldier. His retirement request had basically been denied. And after everything he had been through, he wanted nothing to do with the military anymore. Even with the war over, it still refused to let him go. The thought made him sigh. Seeing his frustration, Natalie tried to cheer him up. Was it really that bad? Reserve soldiers still got paid after all. But that only made Takashi even more annoyed. He immediately called her an idiot. If they kept accepting military money, then sooner or later the military would come calling again. And when that happened, they'd be dragged right back into it. That was exactly what he wanted to avoid. Natalie tilted her head. She thought Takashi worried too much. Even if they were drafted again, they could always run away. Takashi stopped packing and looked at her. That wasn't the point. Why would he spend his long-awaited peaceful life running from the government with Natalie? He had fought for this peace. He wanted to enjoy it. Nothing more. With renewed determination, he zipped up his bag and slung it over his shoulder. No matter what happened, he was going back to Japan. He was going to live a normal high school life. For the first time in years. Natalie smiled proudly beside him. Soon, the two finished packing and left. They boarded a plane. Sat side by side during the flight. Then continued their journey by subway. For once, there were no battles. No alarms. No missions. Just two people traveling home. Hours later, they finally arrived. Takashi stopped in place. The familiar town stretched out before him. Natalie looked around excitedly. So this was Takashi's hometown. Meanwhile, Takashi couldn't take his eyes off it. Nothing had changed. The streets looked exactly the same as they had 3 years ago. For a moment, he could hardly believe it. After everything that happened, he had actually made it back alive. As he stood there lost in thought, Natalie ruined the moment immediately. She happily announced that the town looked like the perfect place to build their future love nest. Takashi snapped out of his nostalgia and stared at her. Natalie laughed at his reaction. An idiot was still an idiot. Without hesitation, Takashi grabbed her cheeks. They were about to meet his parents. Which meant she absolutely could not say anything weird. Natalie confidently assured him she understood. She wouldn't ruin their emotional reunion. She would simply introduce herself and announce their marriage. Takashi instantly cut her off. That was exactly the kind of thing she wasn't supposed to say. When Natalie tried to continue, he shut her down before she could make things worse. The two continued walking. Natalie clung tightly to his arm the entire way. And for the first time in years, Takashi felt truly relieved. 3 years ago, this ordinary life was all he wanted. Now it was finally within reach. As he looked at Natalie, memories from the battlefield flashed through his mind. Countless battles. Countless sacrifices. Everything he endured had been for moments like this. To protect these peaceful days. To protect this ordinary world. The peaceful hometown before him hadn't changed at all. But as Takashi stared ahead, one thought lingered in his mind. The town was the same. The people were the same. The peace was the same. But after 3 years of war, he wasn't. And that realization would soon matter more than he realized. A young woman desperately called out to her brother as guards led him away. Through her tears, she begged him not to go. But Takashi simply smiled. He told her he'd be fine. Then he left for war. Why does Takun have to go? She cried. Suddenly, Karen jolted awake. The nightmare felt as real as ever. Today marked 3 years since Takashi had been sent to the battlefield. Staring at an old family photo, she still couldn't believe it. Her brother had never been special. He was just an ordinary boy with average grades. Yet somehow, he had been drafted. Every day since then, Karen had lived with the same fear. She stepped outside and checked the latest casualty reports. If Takashi had died, the family would have been notified. That had become her daily routine. Checking. Waiting. Praying. And today, just like every day before, his name wasn't there. Relieved, she thanked God. At least Takun was still alive. A voice suddenly called out to her. Karen turned around. And froze. Standing right there was Takashi. It's been a while, Karen. I somehow made it back alive. For a moment, she couldn't process what she was seeing. Then she threw herself at him. She hugged him tightly, repeatedly calling his name. Her emotions exploded all at once. She kissed his cheek, licked him, bit his ear, until Takashi finally complained that it hurt. Even then, Karen couldn't stop herself. She told him she loved him. Takashi looked at her and sighed. Instead of getting emotional, he immediately asked if she'd been eating properly. She looked pale and exhausted. Karen insisted she was fine. So Takashi suggested they grab some beef bowls. But before they could leave, another voice interrupted. Takashi, bringing a beautiful woman like me to a beef bowl place is a no-go. Karen blinked. A woman stepped forward. Takashi casually replied that if it were a date, he'd choose somewhere nicer. But if he was eating with his wife? Then a beef bowl place was perfect. He wanted his beloved wife to enjoy his favorite food. Natalie immediately blushed. Karen, meanwhile, completely stopped functioning. Wife. Takashi introduced them. Natalie confidently greeted Karen. I'm Natalie Tayfight-Binkster. Takashi and I are married with the premise of making babies. Silence. Then Karen's brain nearly exploded. Takashi quickly told her not to take Natalie seriously. She was just a comrade who had nowhere else to go, so she ended up following him home. He even told Karen she could basically ignore her. Unfortunately, Natalie wasn't having that. She insisted she wanted to get along with her future sister-in-law. That only made things worse. Karen immediately declared that she would never allow Natalie to marry Takkun. Natalie gasped dramatically. An obstacle had appeared before their married life. And somehow, Takashi made it even stranger. The higher the wall, the more love burns. Please be a high wall, Karen. Karen stared at him in disbelief. Her brother had survived a war. But apparently, he hadn't come back normal. Before the argument could continue, Takashi cut it off. Let's eat first. I'll explain everything there. At the restaurant, the two veterans immediately began devouring enormous amounts of food. Karen watched in shock. Was it really okay to eat that much? Takashi looked just as confused. Was that really all Karen was eating? It had been so long since he'd eaten proper rice that even this amount didn't feel like enough. But Karen wasn't interested in their eating habits. She wanted answers. Getting straight to the point, she asked what kind of relationship they actually had. Takashi casually called Natalie his bestie for life. Natalie instantly corrected him. According to her, they were the strongest married couple in existence. Karen demanded a serious answer. So she asked the obvious question. Were they dating? The moment the word left her mouth, both of them burst out laughing. Dating. It sounded almost foreign to them. A distant memory from another life. Then Takashi finally explained. The battlefield had been a place overflowing with death. Entire squads would charge in and get wiped out. Even the lucky survivors often died the very next day in another suicide attack. Every day, death stood right beside them. Some soldiers tried escaping reality through drugs and weed. But that usually got them killed too. The battlefield broke people. It drove men insane. And when death could come at any moment, people stopped caring about appearances. They simply grabbed onto whatever reason they could find to keep living. No matter how ridiculous it sounded. And that was where everything began. On the battlefield, everyone clung to the same dreams. Getting married, having children, seeing their families again. As long as they survived today, there was always tomorrow. Those dreams became the only thing keeping them alive. That's why hearing the word, dating, felt strangely nostalgic to Takashi. Karen sat there speechless. Meanwhile, Natalie leaned over and whispered that his sister looked completely creeped out. The joke didn't land. Instead, Karen burst into tears. Only now was she beginning to understand. The battlefield had been far more horrifying than she had ever imagined. Takashi immediately regretted bringing it up. He called out to her gently. No matter what happened, she wouldn't get her energy back if she didn't eat. Today was supposed to be a celebration. After all, he had actually made it home alive. Natalie quickly changed the mood and ordered curry and drinks. Takashi requested katsu curry. Karen asked for nothing but water. As she wiped away her tears, one thought kept bothering her. How could he smile like that? How could someone who had gone through such unimaginable horrors talk about them so casually? The brother she had waited 3 years to see felt different. He was still Takkun. But at the same time, he wasn't. And that realization hurt more than she expected. Soon, the three of them returned home. The moment Takashi's parents saw him, they froze. For a second, nobody moved. Then Takashi smiled. I'm home. His mother rushed forward and wrapped her arms around him. Tears immediately poured down her face. I somehow made it back alive. Isn't that amazing? His mother could barely speak through her sobbing. As Takashi looked at her, something suddenly hit him. Had his mother always been this small? Somehow, their heights had completely reversed. There was white in her hair now. More than he remembered. 3 years. Just 3 years. And she had changed so much. The energetic mother he remembered looked older. Frilier. The realization struck harder than any battlefield memory. His eyes filled with tears. And he hugged her back as tightly as he could. Then his father joined them. Unable to hold back any longer. He embraced both Takashi and Natalie. Thank goodness. I'm so glad you're safe. Takashi apologized for making them worry all this time. But his father shook his head. None of that mattered anymore. His son was alive. That was enough. For a brief moment, the family simply stood there together. Finally reunited. But Natalie suddenly tugged on Takashi's sleeve. She whispered for him to hurry up and introduce the adorable Natalie-chan already. Takashi sighed. Then finally introduced her. Natalie politely greeted the family and explained her situation. Her hometown had been destroyed. Every relative she had was gone. There was nobody left she could rely on except Takashi. She promised she wouldn't cause any trouble, and humbly asked to be accepted into the family. His mother blinked in confusion. So, was she Takashi's friend? Takashi immediately corrected her. Natalie wasn't just a friend. She was his comrade in arms. And not just any comrade. According to Takashi, there wasn't a single person in the military who didn't know her name. She had saved his life countless times. In fact, the only reason he was standing here today was because of Natalie. The room fell silent. His parents were stunned. Then his mother suddenly pulled Natalie into a tight hug. Natalie froze. She had no idea what was happening. But Takashi's mother was crying. Over and over, she thanked her. Thank you for saving my son. Natalie didn't know how to respond. She had faced death countless times. But somehow, this moment left her completely helpless. Then Takashi's mother made a declaration. Natalie could stay with them forever. As long as she wanted. This house would always be her home. Still holding Natalie's hands, she continued thanking her through tears. Takashi simply watched with a smile. And for the first time in a long while, everyone was genuinely happy. That night, after everything had finally calmed down, Natalie looked over at Takashi. He really had incredible parents. She couldn't believe they had accepted her so quickly. Meanwhile, Takashi looked disappointed for a completely different reason. He had secretly hoped his parents would refuse to hand their son over to her. Natalie immediately fired back. Too bad my wonderful inner self never came out. Takashi calmly replied that the only reason his parents accepted her so easily was because that side of her stayed hidden. For once, even Natalie had no comeback. But the mood soon changed. Natalie got out of bed and asked a serious question. Are you sure you don't want to tell them? Takashi already knew what she meant. His body. The modifications. The secret he had brought back from the battlefield. Originally, he had planned to tell his family. But after seeing their faces, he couldn't do it. His mother had been so happy. How was he supposed to look her in the eyes and tell her that her son's body was no longer completely human? Natalie quietly pointed out that his mother had looked genuinely relieved. Takashi nodded. Exactly. Telling them wouldn't make anyone happier. It would only burden them. So he made up his mind. The secret would stay buried for the rest of his life. As long as it didn't affect his daily life, there was no reason to tell anyone. Natalie warned him not to get caught. After all, he was surprisingly clumsy. But before the conversation could get any heavier, Takashi suddenly lit up with excitement. Their transfer destination had finally been decided. The same high school Karen attended. Just thinking about wearing a school uniform made him excited. During the war, he had dreamed about having a normal high school life. Natalie, however, looked completely unimpressed. After years in the military, she had already had enough of group life. Takashi immediately protested. Military life and high school life weren't even remotely the same thing. Then he suddenly jumped on top of her. He swore he would make her high school life the most fun experience ever. He practically begged her to trust him. Natalie narrowed her eyes. Would he take responsibility if it wasn't fun? Takashi confidently declared that by graduation, she would be crying tears of joy while talking about how ridiculously fun school had been. Unfortunately for him, someone had heard everything. Karen stood at the doorway. She wanted to know if Takun was really planning to attend her school. Takashi proudly confirmed it. First, he just had to pass the transfer exam. The moment the word exam appeared, Natalie's expression instantly soured. Meanwhile, Karen simply stared at them. Because there was absolutely no way these two were passing. Elsewhere, someone else was having a much worse day. In a dark room, a phone continued vibrating nonstop. Missed calls filled the screen. Every single one had come from the same person. Oagami Tenga. At the other end, Oagami was grinding his teeth in frustration. His calls weren't being answered. His messages were being ignored. Finally, his anger exploded. He hurled the phone away and shouted in rage. How dare she ignore him? How dare she underestimate him? No matter what happened, he swore he would make Karen his woman. Back at the bookstore, Takashi and Natalie were busy preparing for their exams. Or at least, that was the plan. Natalie complained that studying was a complete pain. Why not just ask the military to pull some strings and get them transferred directly? Takashi immediately rejected the idea. Doing that would expose them as battlefield returnees. The last thing he wanted was attention. He had fought a war just to return to an ordinary life. He wasn't about to ruin it now. Besides, Natalie had her trait. Passing the exam should be easy. Natalie casually agreed. Karen, meanwhile, looked at both of them like they had lost their minds. Were they actually serious? These two were trying to cover 3 years of missed middle school education just by reading books at a store. Natalie confidently declared it was no problem. Takashi agreed. They didn't have time for cram school anyway. Karen finally snapped. Her school wasn't some easy academy anyone could walk into. It ranked among the better schools in the entire prefecture. She had started getting her hopes up. For the first time in years, she thought she might get to attend school with Takun. But now, that dream looked impossible. Takashi barely reacted. Without even looking up, he told her to be quiet. Both of them were concentrating. Karen could only stare. For the past 5 days, they had been doing the exact same thing. From the moment the bookstore opened until it closed. Hour after hour. Page after page. Today alone, they had already been at it for over 6 hours. Their concentration was honestly incredible. Though she wasn't entirely sure this was something that deserved praise. Still, watching them work so seriously made her wonder. Could these two actually pull off the impossible? Or were they about to crash headfirst into reality? Just then, Natalie suddenly shut her book and smiled. She was done. Not with one subject. Not with 2. With all 3 years' worth of middle school material. Karen stared at her in disbelief. Before she could even question it, Natalie grabbed her arm. Study time was over. Now it was time to explore the bookstore. Karen nervously asked if she was really prepared. Natalie confidently declared that everything was perfect. Then she casually added that Karen was always worrying about her despite her being nothing more than a freeloader. That's exactly why she loved her. The words hit Karen harder than expected. She had originally seen Natalie as a rival. Someone who suddenly appeared and inserted herself into Takuin's life. But hearing something so sincere only made her feel guilty. And the more she watched them, the more confused she became. Takase and Natalie were always together. They slept in the same room. They acted like family. Yet neither of them treated it as strange. For a boy and girl their age, their sense of distance felt completely broken. And Natalie herself wasn't helping. She looked like a doll brought to life. Beautiful. Friendly. Always smiling. Even Karen's heart skipped a beat sometimes. Yet somehow, Takase treated it like it was completely normal. Just what kind of relationship did those two have? Then suddenly, Karen froze. Someone was standing behind Natalie. A huge figure, intimidating, and instantly recognizable. Owagami Tenga. The moment he called her name, Karen's face went pale. Before she could react, he stepped closer, demanding to know why she hadn't answered his calls. Accusing her of mocking him. His voice grew louder and louder, until Natalie stepped between them. She grabbed Karen's shoulder and coldly ordered Owagami not to touch her. That only made him angrier. He barked at Natalie, asking who she thought she was. Then he threatened her. And the moment those words left his mouth, everything changed. Her expression became ice cold. Okay. I'll kill you. Karen felt a chill run down her spine. For a split second, Natalie looked like a completely different person. Not the cheerful girl she knew, but someone far more dangerous. And the terrifying part? She sounded serious. Before things could escalate further, another voice interrupted. Takase had arrived. The first thing he noticed wasn't Owagami. It was Natalie. More specifically, the bloodlust radiating from her. He immediately told her not to cause trouble for ordinary people. Natalie instantly pointed at Owagami, claiming she had done nothing wrong. This meatbag was the problem. And judging by his behavior, he was probably stalking Karen. She even suggested crushing him on the spot. Takase blinked, then turned to Karen. Naturally, he assumed Owagami was her boyfriend. Karen nearly exploded. She immediately denied it and declared that she was devoted solely to Takuin. Takase quickly apologized. He had genuinely assumed Natalie picked a fight with Karen's boyfriend. Mostly because Natalie had a habit of getting angry first. That explanation alone revealed exactly what kind of reputation Natalie had earned. Meanwhile, Owagami finally spoke. He asked if Takase was Karen's younger brother. The one who had gone off to war. Takase was surprised. How did he know that? Owagami simply grinned. Then turned around and walked away, leaving behind an uncomfortable silence. Takase watched him go. Then asked the most important question on his mind. Why was that guy wearing such a ridiculously tight shirt? Natalie immediately concluded that Owagami was probably too stupid to know his own size. Karen quickly shut both of them up. Because unlike them, she knew exactly who Owagami was. There wasn't a single student in her high school who didn't know his name. Owagami Tenga. A monster disguised as a student. Someone who genuinely enjoyed watching people suffer. He regularly beat people half to death. Even professional fighters. And no one could stop him. His family held enormous influence. Whenever he caused trouble, it simply disappeared. The rules didn't apply to him. And eventually, Karen became one of his targets. A painful memory resurfaced. Owagami had cornered her against a wall, demanding that she become his woman. Threatening everyone around her. Classmates stepped in to protect her. Again and again. But every time they helped her, they were the ones who got hurt. The more people tried to save her, the worse things became. She watched innocent classmates suffer because of her. And eventually, the guilt became unbearable. She stopped going to school altogether. Karen lowered her head. She had kept all of this hidden for one reason. She didn't want Takase involved. After everything he had survived, after somehow making it home alive, the last thing she wanted was for him to get dragged into another nightmare. But there was one problem. The people she was trying to protect weren't normal students anymore. They were two veterans who had survived a battlefield. And Owagami had just made himself impossible to ignore. Karen fell silent, lost in thought. Then Natalie suddenly spoke up. Owagami was too dangerous. She knew she should have dealt with him herself. Takashi was about to say something, then Karen's phone buzzed. A message from Owagami. If she didn't want her little brother killed, she needed to come to his house. The threat instantly weighed on her mind. Later, back at home, Takashi kept calling Karen's name. It wasn't until the third time that she finally responded. Confused, she asked why he was calling her. Takashi pointed at the table. The food was practically spilling over. But Karen barely noticed. Her thoughts were still trapped by Owagami's message. Maybe she should stop running. Maybe she should just accept his invitation. If she kept avoiding him forever, wouldn't everyone precious to her eventually suffer because of it? The more she thought about it, the more convinced she became. As long as she endured it herself, everything would be fine. At least, that's what she wanted to believe. Suddenly, Takashi moved closer. He immediately noticed something was wrong. Startled, Karen panicked and awkwardly asked what he wanted. Takashi narrowed his eyes. Wasn't she acting a little too nervous? Ever since they returned from the department store, she'd been acting strange. Had something happened? Karen quickly denied it. But the lie wasn't convincing. After thanking them for the meal, she tried to leave. Before she could escape, Takashi grabbed her arm. Aren't you terrible at hiding things? He asked. Karen froze. Her heart skipped a beat. Trying to stay calm, she nervously asked what he meant. Takashi didn't buy her act for a second. He asked if she was worried about the guy they met earlier that day. Before Karen could answer, Natalie jumped into the conversation. It was obvious Karen had been acting weird ever since meeting him. Karen immediately denied it. But Natalie wasn't finished. She suddenly remembered something important. Karen had said that Owagami was stalking her. That revelation immediately caught Takashi's attention. He pressed further. Was Owagami really a stalker? Karen quickly insisted there was nothing to worry about. But Takashi wasn't convinced. She'd practically stopped talking the moment they got home. And now she looked like she was about to cry. What was she hiding? Karen couldn't answer. She never realized Takashi had been paying such close attention to her. And that only made things harder. Part of her desperately wanted him to help. Part of her wanted him to save her. But at the same time, she couldn't allow him to get involved. Those two feelings clashed inside her. She didn't know which one to choose. And if she broke down now, everything she was trying so hard to hide would finally come spilling out. Takashi looked straight at Karen and told her something she desperately needed to hear. Keeping all her worries to herself would only make things worse. When someone carries every burden alone, their perspective becomes narrow. Eventually, they stop seeing solutions. That's why she needed to rely on the people around her. For now, she should simply tell them everything. After all, they were family. The moment those words reached her, Karen finally broke. Tears poured down her face. Not long afterward, Takashi and Natalie went through all the messages on her phone. The more they read, the angrier they became. Takashi couldn't believe what he was seeing. How could Owagami grow into such a pathetic scumbag? Natalie agreed immediately. In fact, she wished people like him would end up on a battlefield. Then she could get rid of them right away. Hearing that, Takashi felt a chill. A dangerous side of Natalie that hadn't appeared for a while was starting to resurface. If she ever crossed paths with Owagami again, things could get ugly fast. Meanwhile, Karen continued crying. She apologized over and over for dragging them into her problems. More than anything, she was afraid Takashi would get hurt because of her. But Takashi simply took her phone. Without hesitation, he blocked Owagami's number. Then he blocked his messages too. Problem solved. As if that wasn't enough, he sent Owagami one final message. He told him the police would be contacted, so he should sleep with one eye open. Karen stared in shock. Natalie burst out laughing. Nice one, Takashi. Karen quickly grabbed her phone back, insisting that this was a bad idea. But Takashi brushed it off. She worried way too much. From now on, she could leave everything to him. Besides, he wasn't alone. Natalie was with him. Even then, Karen couldn't relax. All she could think about was the danger they might be putting themselves in. Takashi noticed it immediately. No matter what happened, Karen always worried about everyone else before herself. Once again, he reassured her that things would work out. But Karen wasn't convinced. Not this time. Later, the three headed outside together. As they walked through town, Karen suddenly called out to him. Maybe they should just go home. Takashi shook his head. The transfer exam was coming up, but they couldn't spend every day locked inside. They needed to find a new bookstore to visit. But Karen's anxiety only grew stronger. What if Owagami found them? Takashi calmly reminded her that she wasn't alone anymore. She had both of them beside her. Honestly, he was more worried about Owagami showing up while Karen and Natalie were house-sitting together. Karen quietly agreed. Because if that happened, Natalie definitely wouldn't show mercy. The last thing Takashi wanted was to come home and find police cars surrounding the house. For Ogami's own sake, staying away from Natalie was probably his safest option. But while they continued walking, Natalie suddenly spoke up. Someone was following them. Takashi already knew. The way they walked. The way they shifted their weight. Everything suggested they were carrying weapons, possibly utility knives. Natalie clicked her tongue. What an annoying bunch. She immediately asked if she could handle them. Takashi refused. If Natalie got involved, she'd probably take things way too far. Instead, he suddenly changed direction. Karen looked confused. Where were they going? Takashi simply smiled. Before anything else, they needed to deal with the source of her fear. Karen didn't understand what he meant, but he assured her everything would be fine. Behind them, the men following the trio suddenly stopped. One of them pulled out a phone and made a call. And then, a car suddenly sped past them. Far too close. The vehicle nearly brushed against them as it shot by. For a split second, everyone froze. The sudden car wasn't an accident. The next moment, Takashi, Natalie, and Karen found themselves surrounded. Several men stepped forward, weapons in hand. One of them swung a metal pole onto his shoulder and smirked. There was no escape. Karen immediately panicked. What is this? Then his attention shifted to Natalie. Watching her reaction, Takashi couldn't help thinking how refreshing it was. He'd gotten so used to dangerous situations that normal fear almost felt nostalgic. Then a familiar voice shouted from the car. Shibusaki. Owagami had finally shown himself. He told Natalie that he was calling her. But instead of responding, Karen completely ignored him. She even started calling the police. Owagami instantly lost his temper. He screamed insults and demanded to know if she was making fun of him. The cheap threats. The lack of vocabulary. The ridiculous attitude. Takashi immediately recognized him. There was no point hiding his face anymore. That only made Owagami angrier. He exploded with rage and started shouting. Beside him, Natalie looked ready to charge. But Takashi quickly stopped her. If Natalie got serious here, there would be bodies everywhere. Meanwhile, Owagami completely lost control. He screamed that he'd destroy everything Karen cared about. He'd break her. He'd hurt her brother right in front of her. And eventually, he'd kill her. Then he ordered Karen to get into the car. Karen was trembling. But Takashi remained calm. Someone would call the police eventually. Still, he knew that wouldn't solve the real problem. Even if Owagami got arrested today, this wouldn't truly end. So instead of backing down, Takashi decided to settle things himself. First, he asked a simple question. Why was Owagami targeting Karen in the first place? If he wanted to express his feelings, there were far better ways to do it. Before Owagami could answer, his followers started yelling at Takashi. They demanded he show respect. Takashi immediately raised his voice. If everyone kept shouting, Owagami wouldn't be able to speak. Then he told them they should apologize to Owagami for interrupting him. The sarcasm hit like a truck. Owagami's face twisted with fury. Did Takashi think this was a joke? Takashi casually replied that he wasn't underestimating him. He just thought Owagami looked like he smelled bad. The insult landed perfectly. Owagami completely snapped. He swore he'd never forgive Takashi. At that moment, Natalie suddenly stepped forward. She reminded Takashi of something he'd promised. He said he'd make her high school life fun. He said he'd make her cry when she graduated. But if trash like Owagami attended the same school, how was that supposed to happen? She didn't want her dream school life ruined by someone like him. Then Natalie turned directly toward Owagami and unleashed everything. She called him trash. A coward. A selfish loser attacking women for his own desires. Then she hit him with one final insult. Karen wasn't his mother. If he wanted someone to listen to his whining, he should go cry to his mom. Owagami exploded. His fist shot toward Natalie. But it never reached her. Takashi caught it. Effortlessly. Natalie was right. As long as someone like Owagami existed, they could never enjoy the school life they wanted. Then Takashi's expression changed. For the first time, he looked completely serious. He tightened his grip. And reminded Owagami of one thing. This was a fight Owagami started. Blood immediately ran down Owagami's hand. Before anyone could react, Takashi slammed him into the road. Then drove a punch straight into the ground. The pavement shattered. Everyone froze. Owagami's followers. Karen. Even the air seemed to stop. One punch. That was all it took. Owagami was unconscious. And the nightmare Karen feared so much had been defeated instantly. Then things somehow got even stranger. Takashi casually lifted Owagami's limp body and asked the gang members to guide him to Owagami's house. Nobody answered. They were too terrified to speak. Takashi even joked that ignoring him would make him lonely. Still, nobody moved. Looking around, he asked Natalie if he'd gone too far. Natalie immediately pointed out the obvious. Of course he had. Now nobody could even hold a conversation. Since the sound probably attracted attention, they needed to leave quickly. And because Owagami was still a high school student, Takashi had already decided who would be taking responsibility. His parents. After that, he told Natalie to spend time with Karen while he handled the rest. He'd be back the next morning. Natalie cheerfully agreed. But Karen couldn't say a word. She was still trying to process everything she'd just witnessed. Moments ago, Takashi had shattered a road with his bare hands. Yet he and Natalie were chatting as casually as if nothing had happened. And for the first time, Karen finally realized something terrifying. The two people beside her weren't normal at all. Even after knocking Owagami out cold, Takashi wasn't finished. He called Owagami's followers over one last time. Then he gave them a simple warning. If they didn't want to end up exactly like Owagami, they'd better cooperate. The terrified group immediately jumped into action. Meanwhile, Natalie invited Karen out for sweets. But Karen could barely focus. Her mind was still stuck on one question. Just what had happened to Takashi during the war? The answer came sooner than she expected. The next day, Owagami's entire family was kneeling before Karen. They repeatedly apologized and begged for forgiveness. They promised to do anything. Anything at all. Hearing that, Natalie casually suggested cutting off their fingers. Karen immediately shut that idea down and said they should simply forgive them. But Takashi had other plans. If they were going to resolve this properly, then they would do it properly. He handed Karen several bankbooks and cards. The family had gathered everything they owned. Savings, passbooks, insurance documents, even commuter passes. It looked like they had brought every asset they could find. Karen was stunned. She didn't even want to accept them. But Takashi turned toward Owagami's father. His expression suddenly became serious. Did they really think they could go home without consequences? His son had ruined countless lives. There had to be accountability. Then Takashi issued his final demand. Every yen there would be distributed to Owagami's victims. After that, the family would leave town immediately and never come back. Trembling with fear, Owagami's father agreed without hesitation. As the family walked away, Karen couldn't help staring. Was that really the same Owagami? The arrogant tyrant who once controlled the town was gone. Everything had changed. And Takashi was the one who changed it. With the matter finally settled, Takashi immediately switched gears. The boring errands were done. Now it was time to focus on the transfer exam. 1 week later, that day finally arrived. Takashi and Natalie sat through the exam with ease. When it was over, Takashi felt confident. He was pretty sure he had answered around 90% correctly. Natalie agreed. For her, the test had been ridiculously easy. As they looked toward the school grounds, reality started sinking in. Starting next month, this would be their new school. But another problem was waiting at home. The moment Takashi arrived, Karen was already standing at the door. This time, she wasn't letting him escape. The transfer exam was over. Now he had to explain his body. Takashi pretended not to understand. Karen wasn't buying it for a second. There was no way a normal human could shatter asphalt with a bare hand. Something had happened to him on the battlefield. Takashi tried to laugh it off. According to him, he was simply fueled by adrenaline while protecting his beloved sister. Karen immediately rejected that explanation. She loved him. But she wasn't stupid. And this time, she wanted real answers. Takashi tried ignoring her. Unfortunately for him, Natalie sided with Karen. At this point, there was no hiding it anymore. Takashi could only sigh. Deep down, he already knew this day would come. The moment he shattered the road in front of Karen, the secret became impossible to hide. Before saying anything, he thanked her for waiting until after the exam. As expected of a considerate and refined Japanese lady. Then he asked for one thing in return. Whatever he revealed today, it had to stay between them. Their parents couldn't know. He didn't want them worrying any more than they already had. Karen agreed. Finally, Takashi asked her a question. How much did she actually know about the war? Her answer surprised him. Almost nothing. She only knew that mysterious invaders from space had attacked. She had searched everywhere online for information about him. But no matter how hard she looked, there was nothing. Natalie immediately realized what that meant. The information had been heavily controlled. That answer made Takashi pause. Karen knew far less than he expected. And that created a new problem. Because some truths about the war were dangerous. Dangerous enough that revealing them carelessly could attract military attention. For a moment, Takashi fell silent. How much could he safely tell her? And more importantly, what exactly had happened on that battlefield that needed to stay hidden from the entire world? Takashi finally revealed the truth. Both he and Natalie had been modified by the military to help wipe out the alien threat. Karen was stunned. Sending a middle schooler to the battlefield had never been normal in the first place. The military had searched for people with special aptitude and turned them into weapons. Karen immediately wondered if that meant he had become some kind of machine. Takashi shook his head. Some soldiers had been mechanized, but his case was different. His body had absorbed various things to enhance his abilities. When Karen pressed for details, he refused to say more. Because the truth was far darker. In reality, Takashi had been injected with massive amounts of alien cells. Looking back, he could only think the military had abandoned its humanity. But with mankind on the brink of extinction, maybe they believed they had no choice. Then Karen asked the obvious question. Was his incredible strength the result of those modifications? Before Takashi could answer, Natalie jumped in. That wasn't the whole story. Even among modified soldiers, Takashi was exceptional. His adaptability was unmatched. He passed every enhancement test without suffering any side effects. The result was overwhelming strength, absurd durability, and a soldier unlike any other. He became humanity's trump card. A living legend on the battlefield. Natalie proudly continued, explaining how the entire war had changed after he entered combat. She even started mentioning famous battles where countless lives would have been lost without him. But Takashi immediately cut her off with a smack to the head. Military secrets were still military secrets. Karen listened quietly before asking the one question that truly mattered. Takuan, you're still human, right? For a moment, Takashi understood exactly why she asked. With a small smile, he joked. What if I said I'm a monster? But Karen's eyes filled with tears. It didn't matter. While she had been living a normal life, Takashi had been carrying unimaginable burdens behind the scenes. No matter what had happened to his body, he was still family. And so was Natalie. Without hesitation, she pulled both of them into a hug. Takashi had spent all this time protecting them. Now it was her turn to protect him. The sudden declaration left both Takashi and Natalie speechless. Then Karen thanked him. Natalie couldn't help smiling. She called Karen an amazing person and admitted how happy she was. The heavy atmosphere finally lifted. Takashi cheerfully talked about the future. From now on, they could all commute to the same high school. At last, they could enjoy the ordinary life they had never been allowed to have. A normal and fun high school life. That was all they wanted. With everything finally resolved, Takashi believed the troubles were over. But as he would soon learn, that belief was painfully naive. Just when Karen thought things had finally calmed down, a new disaster struck. Her mother suddenly called her over and revealed something she had found in Karen's room that morning. A boy's underwear. Karen immediately denied it, insisting there had to be some mistake. Unfortunately, her mother wasn't buying it. In fact, she was far more concerned about something else. Completely disappointed, she demanded to know why Karen was obsessing over her own brother. She reminded her that Takashi only saw her as family. But Karen refused to listen. Covering her ears, she argued that there was nothing strange about it. That only made her mother even angrier. She firmly declared that Takashi was absolutely off-limits. Karen fired back without hesitation. She didn't need anyone's permission. As far as she was concerned, Takashi was the only man for her. The argument was getting out of control. Then the doorbell rang. A visitor had arrived. Expecting nobody, Karen went outside and found a familiar face waiting for her. It was Fumika. The girl happily greeted her and shared some unexpected news. Owagami was gone. He had finally moved away. Even better, everyone at school was hoping Karen would return. Fumika even suggested they start going to school together again like old times. Karen forced a smile. The problem was that she already knew why Owagami had disappeared. And there was no way she could tell anyone the truth. After all, she couldn't exactly explain that Takashi had personally intimidated Owagami into leaving. If rumors spread, they could become a burden for Takashi just as he was about to begin his long-awaited normal life. But before Karen could respond, another crisis exploded behind her. Her mother stormed out carrying a book she had found in Karen's room. Karen instantly panicked. The contents were far too embarrassing. Unfortunately, her mother had already started reading, and she loudly announced that the entire thing was filled with stories about younger brothers. Karen desperately begged her to stop reading it out loud. Her mother ignored her completely. The public humiliation became so unbearable that Fumika decided it was best to leave and promised to come back another time. Karen tried to stop her, but it was already too late. As Fumika disappeared down the road, Karen could only watch helplessly. And she still hadn't managed to tell her the most important thing. Takashi had returned. Meanwhile, Takashi and Natalie were heading somewhere important. Natalie wondered if it was really okay for her to tag along while he met an old friend. Takashi immediately agreed. In fact, he wanted to introduce her. Natalie wasn't convinced. She worried she might accidentally say something inappropriate. But Takashi reassured her. If anything went wrong, he'd handle it. The two eventually stopped in front of a familiar house. For a moment, Takashi just stared. 3 years ago, he used to visit this place all the time. They played games, read manga, talked about nothing, and laughed over the dumbest things. Simple memories. The kind he thought he'd lost forever. Natalie noticed the look on his face and teased him. Was he seriously about to cry? Takashi admitted that this friend meant a lot to him. In fact, their bond reminded him of the one he shared with Natalie now. That answer caught her off guard. Then Takashi began describing his friend. Good at sports. Good at studying. The kind of guy everyone admired. His personal idol. Naturally, Natalie wasn't happy hearing that. She immediately argued that sports were useless on a battlefield and claimed she was better at studying anyway. Then she demanded to know one thing. Wasn't she his idol too? Takashi laughed and admitted that he loved how shameless she could be. But before the conversation could continue, the front door opened. A man stepped outside. Without missing a beat, Takashi greeted him like no time had passed at all, joking about whether he had stayed up too late again. The man standing before him was Renji. And after 3 long years, the reunion was finally about to begin. The moment Renji saw him, he froze. Then he immediately grabbed Takashi to make sure his eyes weren't deceiving him. It really was him. Takashi smiled and casually told him that he had made it back alive. That was all it took. Renji's eyes filled with tears as he pulled him into a tight hug. He quickly asked when Takashi had returned to Japan. About a month ago. The answer instantly made Renji furious. He called Takashi an idiot for not contacting him sooner. Takashi apologized, admitting that he had made everyone worry. But Renji shook his head. He wasn't angry that Takashi disappeared. He was angry because Takashi hadn't come to see him immediately after returning. Watching Renji cry, Takashi finally realized something. His absence had affected his friends far more than he thought. Soon, Renji noticed Natalie standing nearby. With a grin, he asked the obvious question. Was the blonde girl his girlfriend? The comment instantly turned Natalie red. Confident as ever, she declared that Renji had a good eye and even offered to make him her subordinate. Takashi immediately shut that down and introduced her properly. Natalie was his comrade in arms. Nothing more. At least officially. The three headed inside and spent time catching up while looking through old photos. For a brief moment, it felt like the years apart had never happened. But eventually, Takashi stood up. There was another person he needed to visit. The moment he mentioned leaving, Renji's expression dropped. He genuinely didn't want him to go. Takashi tried reassuring him. After all, they would soon be attending the same school. They'd see each other every day. But Renji still looked heartbroken. Then, as if he had been waiting years to say it, he finally revealed something. Even after Takashi disappeared, he never stopped buying the weekly manga magazine Takashi loved. Every single week. He even kept buying the baseball game series they used to play together. Even the bad ones. His voice trembled as he told Takashi he could come over anytime. No matter what plans he had, he'd cancel everything. Just to hang out again. By the end, Renji was crying openly. Takashi could only thank him. The two shared one last hug before saying goodbye. But another reunion was waiting. Soon, Takashi and Natalie arrived at a house surrounded by plants. He called out, asking if Fumika was home. A woman stepped outside and curiously asked if he was Fumika's friend. The moment Takashi referred to her by her nickname, Fumi, the woman's eyes widened. Without another word, she rushed inside. Seconds later, loud shouting echoed throughout the house. She was desperately calling for Fumika to come downstairs immediately. At first, Fumika refused, saying she was busy. But her mother wouldn't take no for an answer. And moments later, Fumika finally appeared. The instant she saw Takashi, she stopped moving. Shock covered her face. Slowly, she walked down the stairs. Then she threw herself into his arms. Tears streamed down her face as she welcomed him home. She had been waiting for him all this time. Excitedly, she started talking about celebrating together and all the things she wanted to show him. Takashi simply smiled and asked if she'd been doing well. Fumika quietly mumbled that he could even stay over if he wanted. To her surprise, Takashi casually replied that it sounded nice. Meanwhile, Fumika continued rambling about how she had prepared everything perfectly for his return. Takashi couldn't help laughing. Some things never changed. And honestly, that made him happy. Watching from the side, Natalie finally spoke up. It was obvious that Takashi was loved by a lot of people. Only then did Fumika notice the blonde girl standing beside him. Confused, she asked who she was. Natalie immediately introduced herself. And then she said something catastrophic. I'm Shibusaki Natalie. I'm Takashi's life. Silence. Fumika froze. Takashi instantly realized disaster had struck. Natalie had warned him beforehand that she might accidentally say something inappropriate. And somehow, she had chosen the absolute worst thing possible. Because Takashi knew one important fact about Fumika. She was extremely serious. The kind of person who never treated jokes as jokes. And worst of all, she absolutely hated impure relationships between men and women. The atmosphere instantly changed. And Takashi could already feel a massive misunderstanding about to explode. Natalie watched the chaos unfold and immediately threw Takashi under the bus. According to her, this entire mess was his fault for flirting with another girl. In fact, she wanted the situation to turn into a full-blown bloodbath. That only made Takashi even angrier. After everything he had done to help, Natalie was now stomping all over his goodwill. At that point he decided there was only one way out. He would settle this misunderstanding himself. Then Fumika asked the fatal question. What exactly did Natalie mean when she called herself Takashi's wife? Without hesitation, Takashi grabbed Natalie and made his move. He boldly declared that Natalie was right. Not only were they in a serious relationship, they were already planning to get married. The room froze. Fumika was speechless. Even Natalie looked completely stunned. She immediately whispered that he was supposed to deny it and make up some pathetic excuse. Instead, he had somehow made everything 100 times worse. But Takashi doubled down. While holding Natalie's chin, he shamelessly claimed that he truly loved her and had already planned their future together. Fumika desperately tried to reject what she was hearing. Surely it had to be a mistake. This time, Natalie agreed. She quickly explained that it was all a joke and that Takashi was simply playing along. Everything he said was fake. Nothing more than a prank. But before Fumika could relax, Takashi struck again. According to him, it wasn't a joke at all. In fact, they had an extremely close relationship. Natalie couldn't believe what she was hearing. She yelled at him for being a shameless idiot. Meanwhile, Fumika stood there completely lost. One person claimed it was true. The other insisted it was fake. She had no idea who to believe. Then Takashi delivered another devastating line. They were living together. Unfortunately, Fumika interpreted that statement exactly the wrong way. Natalie immediately clarified that they weren't actually living together. She was just freeloading at his place. But Takashi wasn't finished. He casually pointed out that a teenage boy and girl had spent an entire month under the same roof. Surely nothing could have happened, right? Natalie finally snapped. She screamed at him to stop talking. Moments later, she completely gave up and started crying. Watching the exchange, Fumika finally reached a conclusion. She still didn't understand the situation. But she did understand one thing. Takashi was bullying Natalie. Feeling sorry for her, Fumika helped Natalie to her feet and gave her a comforting hug. Somehow, Takashi's plan had created an entirely different misunderstanding. Later, on the way home, Natalie complained about how difficult the entire ordeal had been. Takashi couldn't understand why she was blaming him. Natalie immediately reminded him that she only wanted to watch a dramatic soap opera-style bloodbath. Back at home, another surprise was waiting. Karen informed them that the transfer exam results had finally arrived. The atmosphere instantly became tense. Takashi nervously picked up the envelope while Natalie practically vibrated with excitement. Then they opened it. They passed. The next second, everyone was screaming and jumping around in celebration. Takashi could finally breathe. That exam had stressed him out more than some battles. If he had failed, he felt like he wouldn't have been able to face the people who fought beside him. A memory flashed through his mind. Someone had once told him to enjoy a peaceful life on their behalf. And now, he finally could. Wanting to share the good news, Takashi contacted the Director General. After confirming she was still alive, he proudly reported that he had passed. Starting next month, he would officially become a normal high school student. The Director General happily congratulated him. For the first time, their conversation felt completely peaceful. No emergencies. No alien attacks. No war. Just ordinary news. Still, Takashi couldn't help asking how things were on her side. The Director General hesitated. She was fine. But there was apparently a small issue involving Sherry. She asked whether Takashi had received any contact from her. He hadn't. After hearing that, the Director General simply said it was fine and changed the subject. The conversation ended there. But the brief mention lingered in Takashi's mind. Sherry was one of the biggest troublemakers among the soldiers. Someone who rivaled even Natalie when it came to causing chaos. Still, the war was over. She had returned to her hometown. Surely she was living peacefully now. With that thought, Takashi looked forward to the future. The high school life he had dreamed about for so long was finally within reach. This time, he was determined to enjoy every moment of it. But far away, someone was already watching. A woman quietly looked toward Japan and smiled. So this is where Takashi-kun lives. And just like that, a new chapter quietly began. Takashi watched as Natalie adjusted her new uniform. Hey, look at this. Isn't it so cute? Karen immediately agreed. It looked perfect on her. Cute, elegant, almost doll. Natalie blushed. But Takashi could only stare. Something about it felt wrong. This was Natalie. The woman feared across countless battlefields. The living nightmare soldiers whispered about. The woman whose mere presence could terrify even hardened veterans. And yet, one school uniform later, she somehow looked adorable. How about it, Takashi? Natalie teased. Did you fall in love all over again? Takashi instantly got defensive. There was no way this was normal. She had to be using some kind of weird magic. After all, she was still Natalie. And besides, she shouldn't be bragging until she saw him in his uniform. He was definitely the cuter one. Karen immediately told him to stop making excuses and just compliment Natalie honestly. Before the argument could continue, Natalie pulled out her phone and snapped a photo. She was planning to send her super cute uniform picture to Sherry. The moment Takashi heard that name, his eyes widened. She had Sherry's contact information? He immediately asked for it. Natalie casually agreed. That made Karen curious. Was Sherry another military friend? Takashi explained that she was. The three of them were close in age and used to spend a lot of time together. Then Natalie added an important detail. Sherry was just a friend. A completely normal friend. A friend who also happened to be Takashi's wife. The room instantly exploded. Karen looked absolutely furious. Takuin had a wife. That shocking revelation left Karen with even more questions. Were all of Takashi's friends from overseas? And could he really speak English? Takashi casually answered yes. Not just English. Chinese and Spanish too. Karen was stunned. Takashi explained that special biosoldiers naturally had incredible memories. In fact, Natalie was on an entirely different level. Something that took him 3 days to memorize could be learned by her in just 3 minutes. And during their transfer exams, while Takashi struggled endlessly to study for a public high school, Natalie had been preparing for a national technical college. In Japanese, a language that wasn't even her native tongue, Karen could only stare in amazement. But then Natalie's attention shifted to her phone. Her expression changed. Takashi immediately noticed. Something wrong? Natalie sighed. Sherry had been sending strange messages. Messages she didn't really understand. The conversation completely killed her mood. Annoyed, she tossed her phone onto the couch. Forget it. She'd just pretend she never saw them. Takashi frowned. What was that supposed to mean? Then he remembered something. The Director General had mentioned something unusual too. Karen immediately asked if something strange was happening on Sherry's side. For a moment, Takashi found himself wondering. Just what was Sherry doing right now? Before he could think further, a new chapter of his life was already beginning. Standing before a mirror, Takashi adjusted his tie. High school life starts today, huh? He turned toward Natalie and Karen. Did the tie look weird? Was it normal? Karen smiled. It looked perfectly fine. It even suited him. Natalie was excited too. She couldn't wait for school to start. But Takashi kept checking the mirror from every angle. Karen finally told him he was worrying way too much. But Takashi couldn't help it. Because ever since the acceptance letter arrived, he had made a mistake. A decision he believed was for the best. And now, that choice was still bothering him. The memory brought him back to the day everything changed. After he passed the entrance exam, his mother immediately congratulated him. Then she handed over something unexpected. His school uniform. And a brand new smartphone. Takashi was shocked. The acceptance letter had only arrived yesterday. How was everything already prepared? His mother revealed the truth. Every year, she had asked the school about the process so everything would be ready the moment he came home. She didn't want his transfer delayed. After everything he had been through, she wanted things to go smoothly. And from now on, he didn't have to carry everything alone anymore. He could rely on his family. As much as he wanted. Takashi was left speechless. Then his mother asked for the admission documents. She was about to transfer the enrollment fee herself. But Takashi quietly admitted that he had already paid it. Using his military salary. He had even bought his own smartphone. In the military, taking care of yourself was simply normal. But his mother immediately scolded him. There was no reason for him to spend his own money on those things. She and his father were working hard for a reason. He was their son. And after all the hardships he had endured, it was time for him to rely on them a little more. And hearing those words left Takashi completely silent. As Takashi reflected on everything, one thing became painfully clear. His common sense had changed completely over the last 3 years. He had promised himself he would be a good son from now on. But honestly, he was hopeless. Before he could dwell on it any longer, Natalie called out to him. If he didn't hurry up, they were leaving without him. Takashi quickly snapped back to reality and followed after them. As they walked toward school, he kept reminding himself of one thing. Things were different now. From today onward, he wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a weapon. He was just a normal high school student. At least, that was the plan. Meanwhile, the classroom was already buzzing with excitement. The transfer students were arriving today. Everyone was talking about it. Some students could barely contain their curiosity. One guy had even downloaded a translation app just in case. The moment his classmates heard that, they decided to do the same. Rumors were spreading everywhere. A returning student. An international student. And apparently, the girl was incredibly cute. Nobody could stop talking about it. The boys were excited. The girls were curious. And the anticipation kept growing. Then the conversation suddenly shifted. A girl pointed out an important problem. If a super cute transfer student arrived, wouldn't that put Amano-kun in danger? The girls reacted immediately. Absolutely not. Nobody was stealing Amano from them. Right on cue, Amano himself walked into the classroom. He immediately suspected the girls were gossiping about him again. As soon as he sat down, they bombarded him with questions. What did he think about the transfer students? Amano looked completely uninterested. Honestly, he didn't understand why everyone was making such a big deal out of it. A cute girl was joining the class. Class D was already full of cute girls. One more wouldn't change anything. The girls instantly turned red. Then, before anyone could continue the conversation, the teacher arrived. The room immediately fell silent. The transfer students were here. Everyone stared at the classroom door. And then Natalie walked in. The entire room froze. All eyes locked onto her. The teacher asked the newcomers to introduce themselves. Without hesitation, Natalie stepped forward. "Sup? It's Natalie-chan. Nice to meet everyone." The classroom erupted. Students immediately showered her with praise. She looked like a doll. Like an angel who had just descended from heaven. The reaction was overwhelming. Seeing all the attention focused on Natalie, Takashi decided it was his turn. He introduced himself as well. "Nice to meet everyone." But compared to Natalie's entrance, his presence barely registered. And during break time, things only got worse. The entire class surrounded Natalie. Questions flew nonstop. What country had she studied in? Natalie simply smiled. That was a secret. The mystery only made everyone more interested. Then they praised her Japanese. Her pronunciation was flawless. Her intonation sounded perfect. Natalie happily accepted every compliment. She proudly explained how hard she had studied Japanese. The praise immediately doubled. Everyone adored her. From a distance, Takashi watched the scene unfold. Natalie looked genuinely happy. And honestly, that made him happy too. Still, there was one small problem. Everyone seemed so obsessed with Natalie that nobody even noticed he existed. With a quiet sigh, he decided to leave. After classes ended, Natalie was immediately surrounded again. One classmate wanted to walk home together. Another recommended a cute cafe near the station. Someone else suggested throwing a welcome party. The invitations just kept coming. Natalie looked toward Takashi for help. But Takashi simply told her to go ahead. He wanted to explore the school a little. Natalie clearly wanted an escape route. Unfortunately, she didn't have one. And just like that, she was swept away by her new classmates. Watching her disappear into the crowd, Takashi couldn't help but think. Extroverts really had it easy. As for him, he would enjoy school at his own pace. So he wandered around campus alone. Eventually, he found himself near the baseball field. Practice was underway. He stood quietly and watched. Then suddenly, a ball rolled toward him. The players gestured for him to throw it back. Takashi picked it up. And with what felt like a casual toss, he threw it toward them. The player caught it perfectly. The team thanked him and returned to practice. But Takashi wasn't paying attention anymore. Instead, he stared at his own hand. For years, that hand had been used for something entirely different. Something far more dangerous. But now, he didn't need that power anymore. He didn't need to be a weapon. Standing there on the school grounds, surrounded by ordinary students, Takashi allowed himself to believe something he hadn't felt in a very long time. He was no different from everyone else. Just a normal high school student. After spending the entire day adjusting to school life, Takashi finally headed home. It was getting late. As he walked, he wondered if Natalie had already gotten back before him. But the moment he arrived, he knew something was wrong. The scene waiting for him was pure chaos. Karen immediately ran over in tears. Things had gotten completely out of control. According to her, someone named Seal had suddenly shown up at the house and started causing a huge commotion. She kept demanding that they bring Takashi out. The moment Takashi heard the name, a bad feeling hit him. Then he noticed it. The loud noises coming from the yard. He started heading outside, but Karen desperately tried to stop him. It was dangerous. Takashi asked if she had seen what was happening. Karen could barely explain it. The only thing she knew was that two people were beating each other senseless. Confused and terrified, she kept asking what was happening. Then they stepped outside. And the sight that greeted them was unbelievable. Natalie and Sherry were fighting. Not arguing. Not sparring. Actually fighting. Smoke surrounded their bodies as violent shockwaves exploded around them. Their fists collided with enough force to shake the area. Every punch looked devastating. Takashi froze. At that moment, he could practically hear the sound of his peaceful daily life shattering into pieces.